my question would be, were you interested in preserving her life at all? Okay, we know there's blood on the porch. We know the door is propped open. We know that she separated from her pacemaker at approximately 2:28 in the morning. The offender or offenders did not choose to take Nancy's health-related items that she would have needed to have survived.
Hey guys, it's Jakson Buhaj with TMZ here. Today I am joined by Deputy Coroner Commander Dr. Laura Pettler. She is a forensic criminologist, and today she is here to talk to me about updates regarding the Nancy Guthrie case. Doctor, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you, Jakson. Thank you for having me.
Of course. Now, 57 days since the initial abduction. And it seems like the more answers that we get double the questions. Just drawing from your experience in, forensic criminology, is there anything about the crime scene or the criminal's behavior that stands out to you in this case that the public might not be paying attention to?
It's hard to say what the public is paying most closely attention to in this case, because I think there's been so much information that hasn't been released, which is, of course, the right thing to do by the law enforcement agency. But at the same time, like you said, it is creating a lot more uncertainty, and things that stick out may be the blood on the porch, maybe the fact that the newest release of video came from Savannah Guthrie herself, and she was explaining that the back door of her mother's home was propped open. And things like that, those may be hot topics right now for people in the public thinking about this case and who might have taken Nancy Guthrie.
And, just again, leaning on what you know, I know there's a lot that you don't know because you're not involved with the case directly. But leaning on what you know, is there anything about the crime scene in particular? I know you mentioned the back door being propped open and the blood splatter. What does that tell you about how this was conducted?
It's hard to take each individual piece and assemble them into a puzzle without studying each one. So basically what we have now is, if you think about how you build a puzzle, when you get a box, say it's a 300-piece puzzle, a 20-piece puzzle, you have all these pieces that have different shapes and sizes, right? And you have to study each piece to figure out how it goes and interrelates to the next piece. So basically what we've been given in the media side is a bunch of pieces that we can analyze like that, but we don't know how they fit together. Mm-hmm. And so I think that is one of the things that the public is hanging on is, okay, we know there's blood on the porch. We know the door is propped open. We know that she separated from her pacemaker at approximately, I believe it's like 2:28 in the morning. The phone disconnected from it. We see the suspect on the front porch. There is video footage of the suspect. So how do we take all those pieces, analyze them as individual items of evidence, study their individual parts as just that piece? So we're going to study the door. We're going to study what it was propped open with, because anytime an offender interacts with something in a scene, like, why do they choose one thing or the other? For example, they choose a plant over a rock, something like that. We want to study what they chose and why they chose it. So those, I think, are some of the questions lingering in the public today, is just the footage on the front porch, why law enforcement can't figure out who that is. I mean, there's so many reasons why, and nobody knows, Jakson, what they're doing on the inside of this investigation. None of us do. Only the people that are involved working the case actually know what's going on.
And if you were working this case, 57 days since the initial abduction, what are some things that you would be doing?
Our methodology is called the murder room method. So we would have taken the murder room method, which is used for predominantly for homicide cases, and I would have morphed it and adapted it to a missing persons model and applied that methodology to this case. And so where we would be at this point in 57 days in is, it's a 6-stage method, Jakson. So we would be in stage 4, which is called analysis. And we would be using kind of the same method and technology that we just talked about, where we were going to analyze DNA, we're going to analyze and study the crime scene itself, the blood spatter, the digital evidence, and we're going to compare everything back to the victimology, because how somebody becomes a victim, obviously in random crimes, like if you take, like, for example, you and I are walking down the street, and we're going to go to a coffee shop and have coffee, and somebody drives past and starts shooting. That's a random thing for us to be caught up in the middle of that type of crime, right? But how did Nancy Guthrie become a victim of what appears to be a violent crime? How did she become an abduction victim? And why was she selected as a victim? How did that offender or offenders choose her? And why did they choose her? What was it about her? Was it that she is a vulnerable population as an 84-year-old woman, as opposed to a 45-year-old man who goes to the gym every single day and is buffed and is fit and could be a big adversary for a person that's breaking into a house? Or is there another reason? Is there an actual perceived grievance between Nancy Guthrie and another party who decided they wanted to take her for reasons that are known to them, that are not specifically known to us? I think that law enforcement knows why she was taken, but they're not able to share that information because it would jeopardize their case, and they should hold that close to the vest. So for us, we would be analyzing all of the known evidence. We would be studying each piece of those items of evidence as individuals. Then we would be synthesizing them and assembling them into a newly understood whole of what we knew. And then from that, we can take the victimology, the crime scene characteristics, crime scene dynamics, homicidal profile, and in this case, it would be missing person abduction profile. So that a homicidal pattern or a homicidal profile is basically like how an offender actually executes a homicide. So we would adapt that in this case to morph it into an abduction pattern. And then we would study that. And then we would put all that together and try to come up with some type of a list of potential offender characteristics. And from those offender characteristics and traits, people like criminal profilers can use those lists to develop criminal profiles should they choose to do so. And that's where we would be in this case right now. We would be filling out our target matrix, our interview target matrix, and we would be categorizing people for interview status. And we put people in what we call a green zone. And that means the people who want justice for the victim, that are easy to interview, they want to do anything they can to help. And then yellow zone people, maybe people that are in this yellow zone might be people that might tip off your suspect. And people in the red zone are definitely going to tip off your suspect. So it's possible that we would be taking all of the interviews and the witnesses and putting them in one category or the other because they're relative to the case or relevant to the case, where they have critical information and evidence or they don't. So there's a lot of sorting and organization that's going on at this phase in the investigation.
As a forensic criminologist, is there a specific piece of evidence at the crime scene that you would be focusing on that might actually be, if you could call it, the key to solving the case? What do you think is the biggest piece of evidence out of everything you've seen?
That's a great question, Jakson. I'm not completely sure. If I had to say, I'd probably go back to the behavioral evidence where they did not, the offender or offenders did not choose to take Nancy's health-related items that she would have needed to have survived. And so because there were no like life-saving measures that went into her abduction, my question would be, were you interested in preserving her life at all? Or have you taken Nancy for some nefarious reason related to your own drives, your own psychopathy, your own motives within yourself, and you never had any interest in her survival?
Mhm.
So if you're not interested in survival, people that are interested in money are interested in survival because they need the person alive typically to create a certain scenario where they can ask for money to get the person back. And so I'm not sure that they were interested in her survival. So that's one of the things that I would be focused on. Um, but I tend, honestly, Jakson, I tend not to focus on any particular piece of evidence, and I look at them more as all pieces of a giant puzzle or like a mosaic, to where I keep my mind very open and impartial and objective.
Dr. Pettler, you've been absolutely amazing. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you for having me.